You've heard me say in the last couple months, you've heard me say several times that we as human beings are uniquely capable of doing something. At least we believe we are uniquely capable. We're not aware of another species that has this capability, although there may be some. And that is the ability to be aware of our own thoughts, our own process of thinking. We have the ability to be self-conscious, not in an embarrassed meaning, but in a meaning more of self-awareness. But self-conscious is more appropriate because we are aware of our own consciousness. We can be aware of what we are thinking. We can be aware of how we are thinking it. Did you ever have an idea pop into your head and you say, now where did that one come from? And you can backtrack it. You can sit there and go back and you can find the links in your memory to how, suddenly a tune on the radio made you think of something completely different. We have the ability to reflect upon our own processes of thinking, to be aware, to be self-aware, and to be self-conscious. And yet that is a capability that we very frequently do not use. In general, if you look at the state of human affairs, if you look at what is going on in our world, we can say, well, my God, does anybody think about what they're thinking about? Do they even listen to what they're saying? Or do they just spout these things off and do these things? I'm talking about television and politics and all of those things that take up the public eye. But there's something else that we are capable of doing that we frequently do not do in a state of conscious awareness, and that's what we want to talk about today. And we want to talk about choosing decisions. And the title of the talk is Decisions, Decisions, Decisions. And it's actually the title of a chapter in Raymond Charles Barker's book, The Power of Decision, which if you haven't read it, it is a wonderful book. It is a wonderful book to have on your bookshelf and to take down from time to time. And the other reference for today, look in Science of Mind textbook at Dr. Holmes' chapter on the power of thought. So we as human beings, we have free will. All religions seem to acknowledge that human beings have free will. And we can use that free will for that which is called good or that which is called evil, that which is life-enhancing or that which works in opposition to that which is life-enhancing. We have the ability to choose. We have the ability to decide. And that means we have the responsibility to choose and the responsibility to decide. And more importantly, because we live in a universe where it is done unto us according to believe, we are held accountable. That is, we get to experience the consequences of what we choose and what we decide. There's a difference between responsibility and accountability. The responsibility means that the person who's supposed to do it, that's the one responsible. So if you're in an organization and there's a certain task that needs to be performed and that task is assigned to a specific job function, then the person who is in that job is responsible for carrying out that task. Accountability, on the other hand, means the one who gets to experience the consequences of it being done or not being done. And of course, again, if you go back to politics, you can see when something goes wrong and the politicians have no other way out of it, they will eventually stand up and say, well, it happened on my watch and I am responsible for that. But nobody ever asks them the follow-up question, well, but who's accountable? Who's going to experience the consequences for it not being done? Are you going to take a step down and pay? What is going to happen here? What is the consequence that someone experiences? Everybody wants the rewards, of course, but nobody wants the negative consequences. So accountability means that you're the one who gets to experience the consequences of the decision. And for that reason, by the way, when I was studying leadership, I learned that in the military, if there's a group that meets to discuss a certain course of action, the one who is going to experience the consequences gets to make the final decision. So everybody may have input into the discussion as to what course of action should be taken, but for example, if the infantry ultimately is the one who has to launch the attack, well, it is the commander of the infantry who ultimately makes the decision, not for example the commander of the logistics chain of supply. So what we want to consider is that we, as human beings, as conscious living expressions of God here on this earth, we have the ability to be aware of our thought processes, and we have the ability to choose. We have the responsibility to choose, and we are held accountable for our choices. Not in a kind of end of the world punishing, go to hell kind of accountability, but in the accountability of what we experience in our lives is a direct result of what we have decided, even if that decision was not a conscious decision. Right? We can be aware of our thoughts, but we are not always aware of our thoughts, and we do not always take time to become aware of our thoughts. And in a similar fashion, we don't always take time to become aware of the decisions that we are making or not making. But nevertheless, we are held accountable. So Dr. Holmes kind of made things very simple. This is why I think I was just so attracted to Science of Mind when I first discovered it, which was, by the way, by picking up the little Science of Mind magazine in a newsstand in one of my many travels back and forth across the country. And what got me was the tagline. The tagline said, "Change your thinking, change your life." And that just resonated with me. I had been reading many self-help psychology books at the time. I was a member of Toastmasters and working on personal self-development. And I was reading Napoleon Hill and W. Clement Stone and Dale Carnegie and all of those popular people, Claude M. Bristol. I know some of you know these names I'm tossing out, but all of the popular self-help psychology gurus. This is before the Tony Robbins of the world came onto the scene. This was back in the 70s. And I was reading all of these books, and they all had a common theme to me. And that theme was, if you wanted to have a different experience in your life, you had to change your mind. You had to think differently. You had to look at things differently. You had to begin that very experience in your mind. So Dr. Holmes tells us, change your thinking, change your life, because there is a law in the universe. He called it a law because it acted so consistently. Like gravity is very consistent, so they call it a law. Now, we now know that gravity has minor inconsistencies in it, but it is still consistent enough that we call it a law. And the law of mind is very simply that power that responds to us according to our belief. So in the New Testament Christianity, Jesus said, pray believing in your heart that it is done and it shall be done. So kind of Dr. Holmes looks at New Testament Christianity and says that it's the sum total of Jesus' teaching, if you look at it, is it is done unto you according to your belief. If you look in the Old Testament, if you go back into Proverbs, you'll find in there a statement that says, as man thinks and believes in his heart, so is he. Of course, and in this term, man is generic. It means as humans think and believe in their hearts, so they are. So we have the same idea that there's something about believing. There's something about thinking, and once we do that, there is this part of the universe itself, this very part of God itself, that acts as a law. And Dr. Holmes said it was subjective because it doesn't choose on its own. It has to be given direction, and once it is given direction, it is subject to that direction. It must carry out the direction that has been given to it. And this power is extremely intelligent. It knows how to do. It knows what to do, but it never questions why. And for this reason, Dr. Holmes tells us if we go out into the garden and we put tomato seeds in the ground, we won't get carrots, because that creative principle that is present in the soil and the seed and the sun and the rain, that works together in harmony to produce according to the seed that was planted, that creative principle never questions. If we give it tomatoes, we get tomatoes. If we give it cucumbers, we get cucumbers. Buddhism tells us that everything that we have experienced is a result of what we have thought. The Stoics tell us that what the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. And all of this is saying the same thing over and over and over in many different ways. Change your thinking, change your life. Because if you wish to have a different experience in life, you have to start, if you wish to have a new experience in life, you have to start with a new thought. And that's why it was called the New Thought Movement. You have to start with a new thought. But I ask you to consider what kind of thought is the first new thought that you have to have. How do you go about thinking differently? And the answer to that is decision. Decision. The first thought has to be a decision. To decide that you will have something different in your life. Now, for many of us, when we first start into this teaching, the decision that we must make is to end something that doesn't seem to be working right in our lives. To end the experience of illness, to end the experience of lack, to end the experience of disharmonious relations within our family lives, within our work lives, wherever we go. But there's another type of decision that we can make as we move through the problem-solving phase of our spiritual growth. Then we start to say, aha, but what else could I do? What else would I like to do? What else would Spirit like to do as me? What experience would I like to let God have as me today? If I am this instrument of the eternal life, if that which created the entire universe is expressing itself kind of wearing the costume of me, if that's truly my nature and truly what I am, but I have to decide and cooperate with that in order to give it uniqueness, then how are we going to invite God to experience joy as us and through us today? How am I going to be a greater expression of this love and this life and this spirit which animates me? How am I going to discover and use the unique gifts and talents that divine love has given me? So we move out of the problem-solving phase and we move into the creative expression phase of our lives. But it requires a decision. And one thing, if you look at human beings, not only do we as a group tend not to like to think about what we're thinking about, I mean, if you ever want to get somebody mad, all you have to do is ask them, well, how do you know that? How do you know what you know? Can you explain your thought process to me? And I know this because I had to do this as kind of a consultant. I had to go back and sit down with people and ask them those kind of questions. And the reason was obvious, because they were running a business that had a lot riding on the success or failure, and people were making decisions without any thought into how they were making their decisions. What information were they relying on? How did they know that information was accurate, and so forth? So if you ever want to get thrown out of an office quickly, just sit down with an executive and say, well, how do you know that? How do you know what you know? What makes you believe that to be true? And very quickly they decide that they know because they said so, and that's all they need to know because they're in charge. We don't like necessarily to make decisions. We're not very skilled at it. We don't necessarily do it deliberately. We kind of do it automatically or by default. And if you've ever seen a group of people go into a restaurant and sit down for a meal, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. We've all been through this. You sit down and the servers come around and they give everybody their menu, and you start reading your menu, and just about the time you're getting your mind into the menu, they come back and interrupt you and say, now let me tell you about today's specials. And you go, oh man, I thought I might be getting close to a decision here, and now they're going to give me something else to ponder. And finally everybody puts down the menu and they say, well, what are you going to have? And the person across from them says, I don't know, what are you going to have? And it goes around and around the table and everybody's trying to figure out what the other is going to have, so they'll just have that. And then finally a server goes by with a big tray of food and somebody points to it and says, oh, that looked good, I think I'll have that. And the decision kind of becomes default. No, people just don't want to make the decision, but nevertheless, whatever they bring to you, you have to eat. You know, you have to get the consequences of that decision. Emmett Fox told a little tale about when he first came to the United States from England, and he had never experienced a cafeteria before. You know, they had table service wherever he had eaten in Europe, and he was walking down the street in New York City, and past the world famous Horn and Hardart cafeteria. If anybody's from New York, you know what I'm talking about. I used to love that place as a kid. You'd go in and you'd give them $1 and they'd give you 20 nickels, and you'd go over to the little machines. It wasn't actually a vending machine, but it was a little door that opened into the kitchen, and all the food was there in stainless steel trays. And you put your nickels in and you open the door and you pulled out whatever you want. Well, Emmett didn't know that. And he just walked in, and it was all these people were eating. And everything looked pretty good, and he sat down at the table, found an empty table, and he sat down, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited, and no one came to take his order. No one came to give him a menu. And he just absolutely could not figure out what was going on. And finally he asked somebody, he said, well, you know, what do you have to do to get food around here? And they said, well, you go over there and you get your nickels, and then you go up to those windows and you pick out whatever you want and you bring it back. And Emmett's point in telling the story was, there he was surrounded by all of the good food that one could imagine. It was all right there. It was all ready for the taking, if you will. And he couldn't get it because he wasn't cooperating with the way the system worked. He was sitting there waiting for somebody to come and serve him when it was a self-service operation. It required him to make a decision. It required him to go and choose what he wanted. But he had to choose. He had to go and he had to choose. He had to be specific. And that's what I'm saying. You watch the decision-making process in human beings, and we tend to defer our decisions. But we can't do that, see. If we are on the spiritual path which we are on, we can't do that. We are required to make the decisions of our own lives. There is no one else who is equipped to do that for us. There is no one who can do it for us. We are the only ones who can do it. Now, it's very important because the decisions that we make are going to produce the circumstances of our lives. There is a power in the universe where it is done unto us according to our belief. And our decision starts that change in belief. It starts that new attitude. It starts that new way of thinking. It starts that new way of being that creates the outlet for that power, that law, to do its work through us. Right? Dr. Holmes tells us that the purpose of treatment is to provide the avenue in consciousness within the one who will have the demonstration. We must provide the opening. See, and this is important because a lot of times, first of all, we don't like to decide. Listen, think about why we don't like to make decisions. Well, making decisions can seem like pretty laborious process. It takes away our fun. It takes away our spontaneity. My goodness, if we had to sit down and be conscious of the decisions that we were making during the day and ask ourselves, is that really what I want to have? It just wouldn't be fun. It just wouldn't be spontaneous. So it seems a little bit too organized. But what we have to remember is deciding not to decide is a decision in itself. That when we say, well, I'm not going to decide, I'm just going to let that happen, I'm just going to let that unfold the way that it's going to unfold. What we have decided to do at that moment in time is to allow the whole matter to be turned over to whatever is existing in race consciousness. Remember our consciousness. Whenever you went to the psychology courses, and they show human consciousness, and they use the iceberg as the model, right? And there's only 10% of the iceberg above the water, and 90% is down below the surface. And the idea then is that human consciousness is like that. We are only consciously aware of that 10% that's above the surface, but there is 90% that is below the surface. That we are not consciously aware of what is down there, but the law that responds to us according to our belief is aware of that. See, that's why it says, as you think and believe in your heart being the subconscious or subjective, however you want to call it, or subliminal, but that part of your psyche that contains the beliefs that you are not even aware that you believe. And of course, Dr. Holmes tells us that part of our subconscious is not really ours. It is just a part of the universal subconscious that we make use of. There is this race consciousness. There's this consciousness of the entire human race. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. Right? There is this part of mind that is universal. And we just latch on to a little part of it. And there are things in there that we believe, that we accept to be true, that we are not even aware that we believe them and accept them to be true. And there are things in there that are not even of our own creation, if you will, but they are just ideas in race consciousness, in the collective unconsciousness. They are ideas that we have attuned to, that we have attached to, that we have accepted without even a conscious decision. And yet the law of mind acts upon our belief, what we believe and that we know we believe, our conscious beliefs, what we believe and we don't even know that we believe, our subconscious beliefs, and it is done unto us according to our belief as we think and believe in our hearts. So what happens to us when we decide not to decide is we are saying, oh, it's okay, whatever is down there in my subconscious, whatever is down there in race consciousness, that is what I am willing to accept today. And this is the law of averages, what Dr. Holmes tells us. It's the law of averages. So in the law of averages, if 2.5 people out of every 100 get sick, then if you get sick, you're one of those 2.5 people. Whatever goes on in the law of consciousness is what you have decided to accept through your indecision. So your indecision is just as powerful as your decisions. And now you have to stop and ask yourself, well, what makes the most sense to me? We all like to be in control, human beings we do. What makes the most sense to me? Do I want to have some semblance of control over what's going to happen in my life, in my day? Or do I want to just leave it up to chance, to the law of averages? So I think sometimes we don't decide because we're thinking, well, gee, first of all, it's a lot of work to decide. It just seems too organized. It seems like the real kind of thing engineers would love to do. But I'm a free spirit. I'm a free bird, and I don't want to live like that. But in fact, you are, if you are not deciding, you are simply abdicating your responsibility to whatever exists in your subconscious, and you cannot abdicate your accountability. So what you've said is, okay, whatever's in the subconscious mind, it will interact with the law of mind, and that is what I will accept when it shows up in my life. but rest assured it will show up in your life, because the law has no choice but to work. If you put seed in the ground, the soil is not going to say, no, I'm not going to give that to you. The creative principle of the soil produces in kind according to the seeds that it is given. And what is happening is the law of mind is constantly interacting with your thoughts and your beliefs. Sometimes I think that we don't make a decision because we are afraid. Well, what happens if I make the decision and when I have the demonstration, that is the answer to my prayer, arrives in my life? What happens if I don't like it, if I don't want it? What do I do then? Am I stuck with it forever? You know, the old wisdom, be careful what you ask for, you might get it. Huh? And the answer is very simple. No, you're not stuck with it forever. And what you do if you don't like it is you take it back. You just take it back. What do you do if you go to the store and you buy something and you bring it home and you don't like it? You look on your cash register receipt, you see what the return policy is, and you make sure you get back to the store in the right amount of time, and you tell them, I've changed my mind. I want something different. I want my money back for this, and I'm going to go back in the store and I'm going to choose something different this time. Right? That's what we do. Well, the law of mind is the same. So what happens if you make your decision and you decide what you want to have, and you use your spiritual practice of treatment in order to impress upon your own consciousness and upon the law of mind your new decision, and then you get the answer and you look at it and say, well, I really didn't want that. You say, thank you, law. Thank you. I wasn't clear. I thought I wanted something that I didn't want, but that's not it. So now I'm going to make a new decision. I am going to change my mind again, this time a little bit clearer, this time a little bit more specific. And if that comes along and it's not what you want, well, then you make a new decision. You make a different one. And I'll give you an example, and I've used this before, but it works so well. When we were taking our first year class, Science of Mind 100 class, and we were talking about these things, a gentleman in the class said, wow, he says, can I use this power that interacts with my belief to help me get a new car? I want another car. And the instructor said, of course it works. It works for cars, it works for health, it works for everything. It's done unto you according to your belief. There's no limits other than what you can believe. And he says, well, I want a very specific car. I want a Volvo, and it's got to be red, and it's got to be in a certain range of years, and it's got to be a certain price. And the teacher said, if that's what you want, if you're willing to believe it, you can do that. So he did. And of course, one day he was driving around town. He went down a road that he didn't usually go down, and there it was, sitting out on somebody's driveway with a for sale sign on it. And he looked at it, and it was, the price range was right, the year was right, the color was right, everything seemed right. Excuse me, I had to take another sip. So he got in the car and he drove it over to his friend who ran a body shop at one of the local dealers and said, can you take a quick look at it? I'm thinking about buying this car. And his friend put it up on the rack and took it down off the rack and said to him, very carefully take it back wherever you got it and leave it there. This car has been in 3 major wrecks and it hasn't been repaired right, and you don't want to put your family in it. So the guy came back to class and related the story. And the teacher said, okay, so now we've got clarity. What was more important to you, to have the red car at the right price, in the right range, the right year range, or safety? And he said, safety. She said, did you consider safety the first time you went through your decision-making process? He said, no. So he said, well, go back and include safety. So he did. He went back and he changed it. He said what he realized was it wasn't so much that it had to be the right year range and the right price range, that he wanted that particular car because he thought it was so safe. So he changed his treatment, he changed his decision, and he wanted safe, reliable transportation at an affordable price. That's what he decided on, and that's what he got. So my point is, it's an iterative process. Don't be afraid of making a decision and then getting it wrong, because if you don't get, if you do get what you asked for, what you treated for, what you declared, And you don't want it when you get it. You just change your mind and you just make a new decision and you get a new thought and you go again. That's all there is to it. Okay. And I think the last thing about not making decisions is people are afraid that they're going to be held accountable. Well, gee, if I'm the one that makes the decision and it doesn't turn out right, I'm the one that's going to take the blame. And as we've already discussed, you're the one that's going to be accountable no matter what. It's your life. You're the only one that's accountable for your life. So if you make a decision and it doesn't turn out right, you make a new decision. But if you don't make a decision and it doesn't turn out right, you still have to make a new decision. You see? So you can't escape the accountability. You can't escape gravity, for example. It's like well, suppose I get up in the morning and I don't choose to participate in gravity today. Well, it doesn't matter. Gravity doesn't care. Gravity is going to work. It's a universal law, whether you want gravity to work or not. The law of mind is the same way. Whether you want the law of mind to work or not doesn't matter. It is working, and it is working according to your belief. And you are constantly believing either at a level of conscious awareness or below conscious awareness. And that law is always working on what you believe, like it or not. So the only thing that makes sense is to be deliberate, to use your power, to choose to use your power to decide, to think about what kind of life it is that you wish to have, to think about what kind of day it is that you wish to have. When you get up in the morning, when the clock goes off in the morning, or when the sun comes up, however you wake up, before you even swing your feet over the side of the bed, can you stop and declare what kind of a day it is that you wish to experience? How you wish to be of service that day? How you wish to love that day? How you wish to play that day? How you wish to be the best expression of God that you can be on this planet that day? Start making your decisions the instant that your conscious awareness comes back to you when you awaken from sleep. Now, there's one other thing that we must do when we make our decision, and we must change our mind and we must keep it changed. Emmett Fox tells us that all the time. You must change your mind and you must keep it changed. And what happens is we change our mind one way and then we change our mind back the other way and then we change it back and forth and back and forth. And Dr. Barker refers us to a quote from the New Testament in one of the epistles to James, or the epistles of James. And there it says, a double-minded man is unstable in many ways. A double-minded man. And that's what we are. We're a double-minded man. We think, oh, well, this is my new life. This is my new way of thinking. This is the way I wish to be forever, and to change my consciousness and to have this totally new experience. And 5 minutes later, we're right back. We're right back where we used to be. We let our mind go right back into the old mode. So discipline is kind of a learning, kind of a training. And the best explanation I heard, because I didn't grow up with that definition. Where I grew up, discipline was a wooden ruler and standing in the corner and those kind of things. But if you think of a shepherd and its sheep in the Middle East, a shepherd's sheep were like pets, kind of like we treat our dogs. Right? They didn't kill the animals to eat them. They raised them for their wool. They kept the goats for their milk. So they had names for them. They knew, the shepherd knew each one by name, and the shepherd had the staff with the little hook on it. And that was in case the sheep got in trouble. The shepherd could kind of reach down and pull it out of a cranny if the little lamb fell in, could bring it out. But also if the little one wandered away. So the sheep would tend to walk as the shepherd was moving them from one place to another. They would stay very close together, and they would stay very close to the shepherd because the shepherd protected them. And the other thing the shepherd carried was a big pole, a big stick, and that was for knocking wolves and bears in the nose to keep them away from the sheep. The sheep knew that, and they would stay close, but the little ones didn't, and they had to learn. So what the shepherd would do is take that little hook on the end of the staff. And if the little one just wandered away too far, we'd just gently put it around and nudge that little lamb back into the pack. And that was this discipline. That was the learning. That was the gentle teaching. And what we need is we need the discipline that when we change our mind, we need the discipline of keeping it changed. And what that requires then is it requires our conscious awareness of what we are thinking. So you see how this comes back to we are required to become aware of what we are thinking. We are required to choose to decide what we will think, and we are required to maintain our awareness of what is going on in our consciousness. So that if our consciousness wanders away from the new direction that we want it to take, we can reach out and we can gently nudge it back. And this is why learning to meditate is such an important spiritual practice. You sit down and say, well, this sounds so easy. I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to inhale through my nose and exhale through my lips and count 1, and then I'm going to do it and count 2 and do it again and count 3, and when I get to 5, I'm going to go back to 1. How hard can it be? And of course, the first time we sit down to do it, we breathe in and we breathe out and we do 1, and before we even get to 5, our mind is gone someplace else. It has wandered. It has taken a little trip. We're thinking about the grocery store. We're thinking about the kids in school. We're thinking about everything else, but we're not thinking about breathing and counting. And what meditation, that's a very simple form of meditation, then is it teaches us to come back and gently nudge ourselves. Start back at number 1. Just wherever you left off, don't worry about it. Just come back and start at number 1. See, so the very spiritual practice of just that simple learning how to meditate helps us to become aware of how our mind works. You know, as Osho says, our mind wanders and we follow it. That's what most of us, our life is all about. Our mind wanders around and we follow it, just like it was a stray dog and we followed it through the neighborhood, hoping that somehow it's going to lead us someplace good. So we must learn to change our mind and to keep it changed. And this is important. You know, we can take a magnifying glass, and we can take that magnifying glass outside on a sunny day, and we can focus the energy of the sun through that magnifying glass, and we can create a spot that is hot enough to actually start a fire. So if you're out in the woods and you need to start a fire and you have a magnifying glass, you can do that. Right? But you have to decide, first of all, that you're going to have a fire. You've got to make the necessary preparations and put the tinder and the twigs and everything else that you're going to use to start your fire. You have to put them in your little fire pit. But there's something else that you must do. And you must keep that focus. You must hold that focus. You can't put the magnifying glass out, put a spot in some spot of sunlight somewhere in the fire, in the tinder, and then keep moving and moving and moving the magnifying glass. So you must make your decision to have a new experience, to have a new thought, to have a new way of thinking. And you must keep your mind changed. Dr. Barker asks us to consider that what you and I are the point in the universe where ideas are coming into being. We are the place where ideas are happening. So we want to consider that there's all these ideas. All these ideas, if you will, floating around in collective consciousness. And we attune ourselves to certain types of ideas, the same way you attune your radio receiver to a certain station. You know, you can adjust the knob and you can get classical music, you can adjust the knob and you can get news, or you can adjust the knob and you can get top 40 music. But however you set the tuning knob on your radio, that is the type of music that's going to come through that radio. Even though that radio is capable of playing many different kinds and many different formats of programming, you have made a decision to tune it to receive a certain kind. And what Dr. Barker is telling us is that when we deliberately tune our consciousness to prosperity, to health, to love, to loving kindness, to being of service, to spiritual attunement, to all of these different things, when we deliberately choose, when we make our decision how we want to tune our consciousness, then we become aware of and we become open and receptive to the ideas that support us in the unfoldment of those demonstrations. We start to see things that we didn't see before. We start to hear things that we didn't hear before. They were there, but they were buried in the background. We start to get urges and impulses and insights and say, oh, maybe I need to go to this place and do this, or maybe I need to go to that place and do that. And we start to receive the guidance that is appropriate for the unfoldment of the demonstration. Right? So we have to be aware of that. We have to be expecting it. We have to be looking for it. Divine love now leads me where I need to be. Divine wisdom now guides me as I need to be guided. And we must accept. See, what happens, the last thing I think that I hear when people don't make decisions is, well, you know, God already knows what I need because God knows everything. So I'm just going to leave it up to God. And it's true that God does know more better than we do what we need, but we must accept. See, we have to cooperate with the way that it works. This is why Jesus said the gifts have already been given. It's the Father's good pleasure to give you the keys to the kingdom. He says, but ask believing. Well, if God already knows what we need, if the good pleasure is to give us the keys to the kingdom, why must we ask? Because asking is turning the key in the lock. Asking is the requirement for our acceptance. We have to state, I know that this good exists and I now accept it in my life. So Dr. Barker asks us to consider all of the great accomplishments in life. The Wright brothers decided that they would have an airplane that could fly. Columbus decided that he would set forth and sail the ocean. John F. Kennedy decided that the United States of America would send a man to the moon and safely back home before the 60s had ended. Every great accomplishment starts with a decision, but a decision that is maintained and held and an attunement that is kept through our conscious awareness of what's going on in our mind. So if our mind wanders off in a different direction, we can bring it back and say, no, that's not true about me anymore. No, sir. May once have been my experience, but it's not my experience any longer because I have changed my consciousness. So we have the ability to decide. We have the responsibility to decide. And we have the accountability of deciding or not deciding. We have this because it is an innate part of our nature. There is a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. Just as gravity responds to us according to our mass, and we have the responsibility to interact with gravity wisely. Right? If you go jump off the cliff, you know what's going to happen because gravity doesn't care. Gravity doesn't say, oh, my goodness, well, that's Jim. I'll put him back up on the cliff. The law of mind interacts with us according to the way that we choose, the way that we decide. So what's it going to be? Take something. Take one thing in your life. Take just one thing this week and spend time with it, not only daily, but as often during the day as you can bring your mind back and say, what have I been thinking about that? If it's health, do your treatment for health, and then during the day periodically check in and say, what have I been thinking about health? Most of the time we're not thinking anything about it. And that's the problem, because when we're not thinking anything about it, we're letting race consciousness rule. If it's prosperity, what am I thinking about prosperity? If it is harmonious relationships, what am I thinking about relationships? What am I saying about relationships? What kind of talk am I engaging in at the water cooler about relationships? If it's my perfect fulfilling activities, my perfect work, my perfect service, my perfect volunteerism, what am I thinking about that during the day? What am I saying about that during the day? And most importantly, my spiritual attunement. See, all of this that we talked about today is simply a means of getting to know God more intimately, and how God works more intimately, and how God works as us more intimately. So what is it that I want to know about God today? What is it that I want to experience of God today? How do I want to let this sacred love make its way through me into the world today? And just like Emmett Fox at the cafeteria, we can have whatever we want. We can have the type of work we want. We can have the type of relationships that we want. We can have the type of health that we want. We can have the type of prosperity that we want. But we must cooperate with the universe the way it works. We must choose and choose wisely. We must keep our mind changed. If we get something that we don't want, we just simply give it back and make another choice. And we must never abdicate our responsibility to choose, to raise consciousness. The love of God created each and every one of us out of itself, put us here in this place at this time so that we might discover it, that we might be its place where ideas are coming into being, coming into fruition, coming through us. And keep in mind that no one has any greater ability to access mind than you do. Not Einstein, not the Wright brothers, not anyone. You have just as much access to the wonderful ideas of the universe as any other person. And you have something that most people don't have, which is the knowledge of the fact that when you change your thinking, you do in fact change your life. So take one thing this week, just one. Just take one thing that you're willing to deliberately, consciously work with in the morning, in the evening, and during the day. Change the way that you think about it. Become aware of the way that you think about it. Continue to change the way that you think about it. Continue to make different decisions. Use your spiritual practices. Use your treatment and your meditation. Use your visualization to see the outcome that you desire. Use your affirmations to constantly nudge your consciousness in a new direction. And watch what happens. I think Dr. Holmes hit the nail on the head when he said the greatest discovery that humans can make is when they discover the power of mind. You are a living, breathing center of that power of mind. I invite you to decide today to demonstrate that more fully in your life. This week and from now on. And so it is.